I set out in high school to become what Buckminster Fuller called a design scientist. And undergraduate, I divided my time between sort of pure science and architecture studio. I look at the system as it stands as accelerating towards crises by itself on multiple fronts. And whether this will be, whether this is a cause for optimism or the opposite, I wouldn't want to say. I think it's actually a necessary part of what we have to traverse to go to, a future for the world. If you think about what happens at the moment that one's personal birth chart is imprinted, it's that moment of the first breath, but it's also that moment where you've come through the birth canal and you've basically had this confrontation with death. The full biological terror of not being able to breathe as you're born and having to take that first breath. It may be that the way we cross that transition can only be through some sort of near-death experience. And that the world basically is determined to go there. Because it certainly looks, when I look around, as if we keep having these forks in the road, like there's the rational way that we could go and we'd sort of smoothly get there, and there's the way that leads towards crisis. We're like, ooh, crisis, let's go there. And, on all fronts, we seem to be just determined to accelerate towards the wall. The myth we need to tell people has to be a material myth, because right now the culture is so locked into imagining that we're in a material world that unless you tell the culture a plausible story about matter, they won't believe it. They can't take in the psychic message of it. And so that's thrown me back into chemistry and thermodynamics and physics and making gasifiers. In order to build the plant is taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. And so the plant has a lot of stored carbon in it. But in most biomass energy approaches, when you burn that carbon, all of that carbon goes back in the air, which is carbon neutral. At least it's not making the situation worse. It's not like taking fossil carbon out of coal and putting it in the air. But by making charcoal and putting it back in the ground, we're not just carbon neutral, we're carbon negative. We're actually reversing climate change by taking about 20% of the carbon that was in the plant and locking it up in the ground. And the charcoal has all of the minerals that were in the plants. And when we do this, the soil becomes more fertile, it becomes able to hold more water, it becomes more drought resistant. A gasifier is a device that makes gas out of solid, basically. You're breaking down the carbohydrates into hydrogen gas and carbon monoxide. And so if you oxidize hydrogen, you get water. If you oxidize carbon monoxide, you get CO2. And so if you run that gas into an engine, you can ignite it with a spark and run a regular piston engine. When life first emerged on this planet, it emerged out of the soup and it ate the soup. And it pretty much ate the soup until it was gone. At which point there was the first energy crisis. And, we had to evolve photosynthesis in a hurry. And, against all odds, we did it. We ate sunlight. Then we merrily went along eating sunlight and throwing off oxygen until we had rusted all of the rock in the whole lithosphere, buffered it for hundreds of millions of years. And the oxygen level went up so much that life was spontaneously combusting. And that was the first climate crisis. And both that energy crisis and that climate crisis make our current one look like nothing. And the intelligence that caused the system to jump to the next level is just as mysterious then as it is now. The only difference is that now, as far as we can tell, for the first time, we have these marginally self-aware life forms where we're sort of participating in the awareness of what's going on. And maybe we actually have this responsibility to sort of bootstrap the thing into being. It's as if up until now it's been completely on autopilot, now it's only half on autopilot. And so I still have a lot of faith in the half, and I also have a great sense of urgency that it's our responsibility to get good at it.
Integrate Earth, recognize potential. Crisis breeds opportunity. Are you waiting to be saved, or will you make yourself free? Awaken to essentials, time, second mental. Integrate Earth, recognize potential. Crisis breeds opportunity. Are you waiting to be saved, or will you make yourself free?